All right. Good morning, Doug. I'm coming to you from Medellin, Colombia, and you are, of course, at your home in Uruguay. It's good to see you today. Today, I want to go through some questions from people. Um, let's see. First of all, so I have a whole bunch of them that people have submitted, and I always appreciate that when you do this, people. So please continue to do so, and we will gather them together and discuss them every time we have a chance to do it. So, first question is about the Federal Reserve, and it's from Jim. Jim says, would it be possible for the Federal Reserve to become part of the US government, thus leaving the taxpayers with the $7 trillion of debt that the Fed currently holds on its books?
Yeah, well, that's a distinction without a difference, the Federal Reserve becoming part of the US government. As you're probably aware, it was formed in 1913 between several big banks. I don't know how many there were, 4 or 5, and who owned half of the Federal Reserve nominally, and the US government. And the earnings of the Federal Reserve, I mean, they're supposed to be a profit-making institution. Those earnings above what they spend, which is a couple $1 billion a year to pay all their hangers on, that's returned to the US Treasury. So, gee, it looks like a good deal. But it's a distinction without a difference. It actually is part of the US government. And the advantage to the bank's point of view, since they don't earn on anything on it directly, is they get to influence the Fed's policy that way. It's forget about it merging into the US government and all this type of thing. I mean, it should be abolished. Forget about all these things. And eventually it's going to blow up. So
It'll end up being abolished essentially because it'll be destroyed under its own weight, along with probably our whole financial system, unfortunately.
that's exactly correct. So
Okay.
I appreciate the question, Jim, but I don't think you're thinking big enough in this case.
Boy, and I'll say the last year has definitely demonstrated to me my own deficiencies in thinking big enough about what could happen. And I think that this whole, the COVID hysteria and, the increasing the monetary base by something like 30% in the last 10 months, these things are, I didn't even know, I didn't think big enough about these. So it seems to be something Jim and I both need to work on, I think, is thinking bigger.
Yeah, everybody does.
So let's see. The next question was just they're commenting about, they can sense that, Doug's disappointment with the way the world is headed nowadays. And it says it's almost as if that you, Doug, regards the world through the eyes of someone like George Carlin as a spectator eating popcorn, waiting for the world to succumb to its inevitable demise. And they say maybe he's right, and it is all hopeless. But human beings have achieved, in many instances, remarkable things despite all the odds. And let's see, let me get to the question part here. So I guess I wonder if Doug sees a way out of this mess or if he's just given up entirely. Also, they say, I know I asked before, but please ask him what are his thoughts about relocating a big enough community of people like us to a small island country or city state, et cetera, where we have the power to influence where things are going.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan of George Carlin, and sorry I never got to know him because he was not only a spectacular comedian, but he was a shrewd observer of human nature and the human condition. And he reflected it accurately in many of his sayings, and he's done a lot of good by pointing those things out to people. Don't think upon George as being a defeatist, or me for that matter, but think of George as being an accurate observer of what's going on and calling a spade a spade. And I'm sorry if it's an ugly picture when we look at it. So that's just the way things are. The problem, and I'm looking at the question here, the rest of the question is kind of a long thing from, it's kind of a long thing here from Alex.
I could summarize. Yeah, I can summarize these. Have you given up entirely?
Well, he says, one thing he says is that people are overwhelmed like sheep, and
Mm.
they're not organized in any way. And here, I want to quote, I just saw this earlier. I've read a lot of Solzhenitsyn, and the guy really is a genius. Got faults, but he's a genius. Uh, and regarding what are we supposed to do about it instead of acting like sheep, which is part of the question here, I'm going to read what Solzhenitsyn said, and he is totally 100% accurate. He's talking, I'm quoting now, and how we burned in the camps later, thinking, what would things have been like if every security operative, when he went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive and had to say goodbye to his family, or if during periods of mass arrests, for example, in Leningrad, when they arrested a quarter of the entire city, people had not simply sat there in their lairs, paling with terror at every bang of a downstairs door and at every step on the staircase, but had understood they had nothing left to lose and boldly set up in the downstairs hall an ambush of a half a dozen people with axes, hammers, and pokers, or whatever was at hand. The organs, which is what they call the secret police, would very quickly have suffered a shortage of officers and transport, and notwithstanding all of Stalin's thirst, had cursed the machine and it would have ground to a halt if we didn't love freedom enough. And even then, we had no awareness of the real situation. We purely and simply deserved everything that happened afterwards. So that's what Solzhenitsyn and his buddies were saying to each other in the camps where they wound up. And yeah, he's completely accurate. That's what's happening in the US.
And
Not
so,
as bad, slowly, but it's happening.
but I think we talked about this last week. The worry that I've had is that, is that people are go along with the destruction and the slow bleed of their, economic livelihood, and they just keep rolling over and going along with it. And then once they realize that it's actually, and at least, not maybe in literal life and death, but economic life or death, once they realize that those are the stakes, it's too late. They don't have the resources to fight against it anymore. They've just cooperated with it for so long that once that they get to the end, and now they're in the prison camp thinking, if only we would just said something, if we'd said no.
Exactly. And even now, I don't know how long this hysteria with COVID is going to last. And maybe the next COVID lookalike is going to be even worse and more serious. But look, I've been saying for years, many years, that if you're in a position to, you've got to have a crib outside wherever you live, preferably in another country, which might be mellower. I mean, look, if you were in Russia or in Germany or in Vietnam or in the Congo or all kinds of places when the going got tough, you didn't want to be there. So you've got to plan ahead on these things. And most people don't. And that was another end of the question he's got here. He says, if I see a way out of this mess, or if I've given up entirely. No, I haven't given up entirely. That's why I'm here in the middle of a large and very pleasant estancia in Uruguay.
Right.
I can't go anywhere, but it's pretty pleasant while I'm here. Okay. Unlike a lot of people that are trapped in little apartments in the cities in the US. So he says, this is funny, Matt. He says, please ask him what his thoughts are about relocating a big enough community of people of like minds to a small country or a city state where we'd have power to influence where things are going. Well, I guess George doesn't know. I've tried that. I spent a lot of money setting up a community which was supposed to be libertarian oriented in Cafayate, Argentina. And it was an artistic success, but a financial disaster, quite frankly, for me and the other divestors. I mean, nothing we couldn't afford, but still, who needs a big financial hit? And these things don't work. It's just like the thing in New Hampshire, the Free State movement has set up. Yeah, yes and no. It's a real problem. Look, when you're only 2% of the population or something like that, you can kind of forget about it. I
Mhm.
mean, you're either going to be washed away or they're going to come and get you. So, and setting something like that up formally, it's almost like painting a target on your back, it seems to me.
Mhm.
Uh, and frankly, a lot of the locals don't like it because people like things the way they are. And when you change something and have different ideas of right and wrong and good and bad, they're not too happy about it. So no, that idea doesn't work. And how long is this? So, oh, anyway, as far as giving up is concerned, uh, I've given you a quote from Solzhenitsyn, but I looked at this question before, which you sent me. And I'll give you a quote from Epicurus. And Epicurus has an undeservedly besmirched reputation because people think Epicurus, wait a minute, wasn't he an Epicurean? Which meant that, he ate too much, he drank too
Hedonist.
much, and, it was all about pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, there's a certain element of that. He believed in happiness and enjoying life as opposed to being, walking around like a hangdog. But here's what Epicurus says about that, as long as we're on the subject of a community where you can be happy. And incidentally, Epicurus believed in living among your friends where were all like-minded and all that. So that's the reason I bring this up, because he thought about these things himself. But I'm trying to reform his reputation, which has been unjustly besmirched. And Epicurus says, luxurious food and drink in no way protects you from harm. Wealth beyond what is natural is no more useful than an overflowing container. Real value is not generated by the theater, baths, perfumes, and ointments, but by philosophy. So
Mm.
I don't know, add that into the mix. But
Mm.
I do like to hang around like-minded people, no question. And I don't
No
like
question
hanging
about it.
around, Marxists and socialists and people like that. They're just
Right.
a pain.
Right. Well, especially anybody who's closed-minded is unpleasant to be around, regardless of their preferences. If they aren't open, they're just very unpleasant if they aren't open-minded to ideas and discussion.
Absolutely. So anyway, probably said more about that than needed to be said, but
Yeah, I think
since
that's
you
a good
sent me the
one.
question earlier and I read it, I thought I'd bring something
Well, and I
from
think
outside to the
the,
conversation.
the giving up thing is interesting, and I just add a bit to that, and that people think that if you're not going to fight, quote, fight, then you are necessarily giving up. I think that's the way that people look at that, and I think direct confrontation with, if you don't like something that's happening in your town, and organizing a protest or something like that, or this direct confrontation is often the least effective way for you to actually make any kind of change anyway, or to preserve the rights and liberties of you and your family and friends. I mean, it's the direct confrontation often is just really painting a target on your back, and also you're just expending your resources. I kind of think of it like almost like in the Sun Tzu sort of way. You got to understand what exactly is your enemy, even like what exactly is the challenge that we face today, and until you can really understand, because I mean, like 6 months ago, people might have thought it's Antifa and Black Lives Matter. I mean, I had talked to they're like, these people are burning the streets down. We should go, we should directly confront these people. I
Hmm.
mean, I had a lot of friends who had that attitude, and because these people are destroying the city, and so I understand that. But do you really think they're the problem? They're not the problem. And so sitting back and understanding really matters.
Yeah, you're totally right on that, Matt. And the situation we're in now is somewhat reminiscent of the 1920s in Germany, when, sure, the communists were out in the street doing what Antifa and Black Lives Matter is right now, but was it a very good solution that that then the National Socialists decided to counter them with the brown shirts, the SA? I
Right.
mean, it really wasn't very helpful.
Exactly. Okay, so let's see. Next question here. Speaking of fascism, someone asks, are we not in a fascist system today already with all the subsidies and all the regulations that are out there today?
Yes, we are. Absolutely. It's just not quite yet a fascism. And of course, as I've tried to explain before, fascism actually has nothing to do with nifty looking black uniforms and jack boots and that type of thing. It's an economic system. And we're in full fascism. We've been in a fascist system for a long time. As Mussolini pointed out, it's the melding of the corporate world with the state. So yeah, of course we're in a full fascist system.
Good. Or not good, but good answer.
Yeah, actual.
So someone says, given your expectation of a stock market collapse, do you think it would be wise having a large percentage of holdings in precious metals or commodity stocks, or rather wait in cash until this disinflationary wait in cash until this disinflationary event actually happens to then accumulate stocks? So there's basically two questions that are essentially about the stock market collapsing, and the other one was relating to, will mining stocks also get hurt if there's a market collapse?
Well, mining stocks usually do get hurt during a collapse because they may be a play on gold, but they are also stocks. And when people need liquidity, when the market is crashing to pay off their margin debt and so forth, the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater. So yeah, they can come down a lot. That's on the one hand, which is why you ought to keep some cash, because it's better to lose like a guaranteed 5% per year at the moment than not have any cash and be forced to do things that you don't wish to do. But speaking to the mining stocks, they're actually amazingly cheap right now. Not cheap like the South Africans were back in the mid 70s when they were yielding 30 or 40 or 50 or 60% in current dividends by 1976, when gold had fallen 50%. They're not that cheap. But you've got companies that are, any company that's mining right now is coining money, because the average all-in sustaining cost of an operational gold mining company today is about $1,000 an ounce. Some companies are more, a lot of companies are a lot less, and they are coining money today. They're very, very cheap. And if you believe that gold is at least going to stay where it is or go up a lot, I think it's going to go up a lot. At some point, the institutions and even the public eventually are going to pile into these things. And they're such a teeny weeny little portion of the market, they're hardly even a rounding error, that this is going to be an explosive bull market. I think the whole gold stock market, I'm not talking about necessarily Barrick and Newmont, which are big companies, still so small that only one of them's even on the S&P 500, that's Barrick. But yeah, the whole market's going to go 10 to 1, and some of these stocks are going to go 50 or 100 to 1. So that's the way I see it. And I think that answers the question.
I think so too. So when we have some of your favorite gold stock recommendations in a report, and in the description of this video, you can just join our email list and you'll get a copy of that report with some of Doug's favorite gold stocks. Well, sticking with markets for a second, one of the questions I know shows up later is, you mentioned in passing last week that you were becoming very interested in some oil stocks. Can you just explain a little bit more about that now, like what you see and your thoughts on the future of that space?
Yeah, this is very interesting. Most people don't realize that at the peak of the oil bubble, and when would that have been? In the early 80s, the S&P 500, 33% of its value was in oil stocks, a
Wow.
third. Now, most people don't know that it's only 2% of the S&P is in oil stocks, including big ones like Exxon and BP and Shell. Only 2% of the S&P from 33%.
Amazing.
So they are really hated at this point. And I think there's actually very good reason to believe that oil is heading a lot higher and they're going to come back into fashion. So in addition to gold stocks, at this point, I really like energy stocks, oil stocks. And I mentioned BP and Shell, and those are two super majors that are interested in getting out of the oil business. They've actually said that. So this is the bell ringing at the bottom of the market. So the
Interesting.
answer is yes. Actually, what do I prefer? I prefer Canadian oil companies. They're really cheap at this point. And we ought to add perhaps a few of these to the list of things in the report.
Yeah, if you want to send me a couple of the names, I can add them to the report, and people, when they join the list, they can get access to this report.
Yep.
Great. So
yeah, they're about as cheap as the golds are actually right now.
amazing. Okay, so someone asks, they say, what's Doug's take on the argument for wearing masks / social distancing to relieve hospitals and healthcare infrastructure due to limited capacity?
You know, I'm not sure what the facts are. When I flew down here to Uruguay, just to be on the safe side, because I didn't know how bad it would be trying to get on the plane or what kind of idiotic rules the airline would impose at the last minute. So I got a COVID test, and fortunately I got the answer back 3 days later. It could have been as much as a week. Anyway,
I think that you went to the doctor visit, and I remember you were telling me that there were the line of people that just wanted to be tested for.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I talked to the nurse, and I said, "What are all these people doing here?" And she says, this is the nurse. She didn't have any ideological take on it or anything. She's just a nurse taking blood and doing things like that. So these people are all just panicking. There's nothing wrong with them, but they want to have their test, and it's expensive. It's $150 to take the test. So I don't know what to believe when it comes to reporting about hospitals being overrun and so forth. Maybe it's just overrun with hysteria patients. I just don't know. And ICU beds. Maybe most hospitals only have like 2 ICU beds, small ward. So yeah, it's easily overloaded with almost anything. And nobody's making the distinction here between infections, in other words, where you may have the virus, but it's completely trivial. You're non-symptomatic or so mildly symptomatic that it doesn't make any difference, and actually getting sick, where you got to lay down or be in bed for a day, or being seriously ill. Nobody makes these distinctions. So it's an embarrassing hysteria as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the idea also, if in March, when there was a lot we didn't know about this, and then we had the whole 2 weeks to flatten the curve, like that kind of idea. I think a lot of people thought that's since we didn't know what was coming, it was reasonable. The whole argument of, well, let's just make sure that the hospitals don't get overwhelmed, like that was a reasonable thinking in March, it seemed to me. But
Reasonable at the time. Yes, it was, I thought.
but we have, in at least America, we have seemingly unlimited amount of money for the government to spend on things. If hospital capacity were a major concern, you would think that the time between March and December, we would have increased hospital capacity. It seems like we could have literally doubled hospital capacity in the 10 months we've had in this time period. So for me personally, if we're still worried about hospital capacity, then it just points to the incompetency of our leadership again, because that's seemingly easy to achieve. If we needed more hospital capacity, we could have had it. We could build it.
And even back then, in the early part of this so-called pandemic, the U.S. sent that naval hospital ship to
Yeah,
New
looking
York
at,
was a pandemic. The US government sent a naval hospital ship to New York, was never used. And most of the ICUs and emergency rooms in New York were apparently empty during that.
hmm,
So the problem is, you really can't believe anything today. This is so ultra politicized. You really can't. What do you believe?
hmm. Yeah, you have to, what do I believe? Are you asking me or you're asking them?
Oh, well, both.
Oh,
But you're on the line,
yeah, I
so
mean, I'll
tell
say,
me.
well, I'll just say my belief is that, my belief is that the stats I saw was that the total deaths in the US is essentially on par with what it has been in past years. It's slightly below, but it's essentially on par. So we don't have an increase of overall deaths from this disease, is what it seems to me. And in that case, we should have hospital capacity.
I saw that too. And incidentally, I saw the numbers for Canada and the UK. And in terms of total deaths, it's completely flat
Hmm,
with the last 5 years. There's no change at all.
hmm.
So that is actual proof that this is mostly a sham. It's
Mostly a sham.
just another thing that can kill you, along with your plane can run into a goose at 20,000 feet and you can die.
Right,
Okay, well, we better insure against that too.
exactly. That's crazy. Okay, so someone asks about the relating to money supply and inflation. Can you ask Doug what's his take on the circulation of base money versus broad money? You know, a lot of people say, well, yeah, the Fed's printed a lot of money, but it doesn't really matter because of, let's say velocity or whatever. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that these numbers are increasingly worthless. Uh, just like studying the numbers of the Argentine government on their money supply and their official inflation figures is completely worthless. It's meaningless. Uh, anyway, what is money? Before the institution of paper money with the Federal Reserve, you knew exactly what money was. It was how many gold coins were in circulation and what they added up to. $20 double eagles, $10 eagles, and so forth. You knew what the supply of these things were, and you knew what the money supply was. And some of them were put into demand deposits, some were put into time deposits. That didn't change anything. But today, with the fractional reserve system and QE, that money going various places, we really don't know anymore. It's not like it would be in a sound money system,
Hmm.
where we'd know exactly because we know how much gold was circulating. That is an objective number. Today, they've got all these different measures of money supply, how quickly M4 can be turned into cash currency,
Right,
but nobody can do that in practicality, and it would be illegal to try,
right.
really. So,
Yeah.
I, these numbers are increasingly just things to keep people with worthless PhDs occupied shuffling
Uh,
paper.
Seems true. So, someone asked about religion, and you mentioned a couple of times the fact that you were raised as a Catholic. So they ask, and you can go as much in detail on this as you want, but they say they want to know why you walked away from Catholicism and became atheist. Just in your overall reasoning behind the decision is what they're looking for.
Yeah, well, I believe in thinking for myself as opposed to believing what I'm told. Okay,
Mm,
the fact that you're brought up a certain way uh, really shouldn't influence you, quite frankly, because you might have been brought up in the USSR or in Mao's China, and you can't let that influence you either. So you've got to
right.
think for yourself. Uh, and we could talk sometime, although most people would find it offensive, I'm sure. We could talk about religious beliefs and so forth. I mean, after all, it's something you're never supposed to talk about. But look, one thing I've learned, and I used to make fun of people's religious superstitions. I don't do that anymore because it's important for everybody to believe in something, believe in something. And I guess that's the value of religion. And in our society today, it's also got a function teaching people some kind of moral precepts. A lot of them aren't very good, in my opinion, but something is probably better than nothing. So, when it comes to religion, include me out. But I no longer make fun of it because it does serve a useful purpose.
I
And
think
we
so
could
too.
talk about it at length sometime in the future. But,
Yeah,
you
we should
know,
devote a specific episode to it so that you can really flush it out and make sure that everyone across all spectrums here is offended, because that's undoubtedly what would happen with a real deep conversation about it.
unquestionably, it's as I pointed out, it's why I don't get invited to dinner parties more than once by the same host, typically.
Yeah. Um, Question for Doug: as someone who wanted to take your advice on making their fortune in Africa, as a young person who, you talked about, you've encouraged young people to look at Africa as a place where they could really, carve out their fortune. So he says, as someone who's interested in taking that advice, would you recommend trying to work with the Chinese on any speculative ventures in Africa? And also, what are your, do you have any strong opinions about Rwanda?
Well, I don't think you can work with the Chinese on any kind of venture in Africa because, look, they work with each other, okay? They share background, they share language, they share a way of looking at things. They've known each other for years in most cases, the Chinese that are in Africa. So, you're going to be as much of an outsider to them as you might be to the Africans themselves. So there's probably not much you can do with the Chinese other than someplace where perhaps you get to know some individual Chinese merchant. But the masses of Chinese that are coming to Africa, no, not much you can do there. Not much you can bring to the party. So there really isn't much. What was the second
It,
part of the question?
it,
Was there?
well, the second question, if you have any strong opinions about Rwanda.
I've never been there. I've been on the border of Rwanda, both in Uganda and in the Congo, but never actually went into Rwanda. And of course, it's a good question because who knows how many people got hacked up with machetes, what was it, 25 years ago, roughly?
Yeah.
500,000, a million? No, nobody really knows. So did that straighten them out? Or are there still a lot of people that were traumatized and learned a lot of bad habits then? I don't know. Is it going to be okay? Or did they solve the problem by killing all the bad guys? Supposedly they were bad guys
Yeah.
who got killed, or at least Tutsis.
Right.
So don't know, can't answer the question.
But that's one that you'd probably say, in terms of, you use the expression of, going into the deep end of the pool in Africa, you'd probably consider Rwanda the deep end of the pool, I imagine.
I think I would, although reports that I read about Rwanda indicate that it's prosperous and doing well, and the natives are not currently restless, and seems like a normal country again. Well, it's like Cambodia. I've been to Cambodia a couple of times, and it seems like a perfectly normal country. Hard to believe after about a quarter of the population was murdered, but here it is. You go there and everything seems fine. But these things, once they happen in a country, there are ripples, I think, that last for some time. There's lots of people, middle-aged and young, that survived, that picked up some bad ideas and bad habits that might come to the surface again. So yeah, I'd call it probably the deep end of the pool still.
Okay. Somebody asks, what's Doug's recommended cocktail for watching the collapse on the big screen television?
Well, I don't drink alone, but what drinks do I prefer? I do like martinis, very dry vodka, if you please, with 3 olives, preferably. I like appletinis also. And I have a psychological predisposition towards drinks that show some class, that have an
Mm.
umbrella in them. That's how you know it's a classy drink. But and they're tasty, but you know, they're tasty because they're full of sugar. So
Mhm.
everything else being the same, I'll go with that kind of martini that I described, or uh, bourbon on the rocks, or scotch straight up. And
Mm.
I don't like tequila.
Mm.
I mean, I just don't. So rule
No,
that one out.
some of it's become better. Like there's some high end tequilas that have become popular recently that totally changed my view on what tequila was all about. But it
Hmm.
many bad experiences as a younger man, I think, make it hard to adopt. You know.
Well, I'll try to savor some of the better ones. I also like brandy Alexander's, incidentally.
Mm. Hmm. I think I remember a mention of that in a book that you've written.
Yeah, it's like drinking an alcoholic milkshake.
Ah, okay. I've never had one. I'll have to give it. So somebody says, what would you recommend? Are there any publications or sources of information you'd recommend for a beginning speculator?
Uh, no, I mean, you could read Victor Niederhofer's The Education of a Speculator. He's a very smart guy who's made a lot of money and lost a lot of money trading commodities mostly. So that's the only book I can think of that actually has that in the title. But I think my answer to the question is this is from a financial point of view, this is the reason why you want to know as much as you can about as many things as you can. Why, from a speculator's point of view? Because it'll allow you to see distortions, things that
Mm.
aren't usual, and to understand the way things work so you can kind of predict when they're not working properly. So there is no actual course that you can take about being a speculator. It's a question of having as much knowledge as you can possibly get, both in depth and breadth,
Mm.
and then applying it to buying and selling stuff.
Mm.
That's the best answer I can give. I mean, you have a thought on that, Matt?
Oh no, I mean, well, you're the king speculator here, but I definitely think you're right. You just you have to be. Uh, I mean, being a keen observer of events is really important to be objective about and see what's happening around you, but without the context of, like you said, the breadth and depth of skills and experiences, it's hard to even understand the things that are happening around you. So, well, I don't know. I think the biggest thing I'd say is that it's speculation is like investing certainly, and speculation certainly involves a lot of risk, and so I think people got to be very good at managing their downside much more than focused on where the biggest opportunities are. Personally, I just think if you don't manage your downside well, it doesn't even matter. You end up making bad decisions because you get over leveraged. You don't have enough cash on hand, so you end up selling when you don't want to sell. um, like
Yeah,
risk management.
I think it was Harry Schultz that said, "I'm often wrong, but never for more than 24 hours."
Ah,
That's
that's
one
a
way of
great,
looking at
exactly, that's really good. Okay, so someone says, since now we know that Doug was a confirmed hippie, which they find difficult to imagine, but you mentioned this in a prior episode,
it.
and says he's partial to Taoism. They wanted me to ask you if you meditate, and if so, how often?
Uh, yeah, I do meditate, and as often as I think of it, but as in so many things in life, I'm not well disciplined. So I'll do it when I'm sitting in an airport and I don't feel like reading, and I'll try to do it then. I'll do it any odd time of the day for a short period of time. Now, if I was serious about it, and perhaps I should be, I would sit in a lotus pose for a half an hour or 45 minutes at a time and go through the whole drill. Uh, well, I can, but the answer to the question is yes, but not nearly as often as I should, and
Did
at odd
you
times.
Did you study a specific style of meditation, or is there a specific practice that you use?
No, because there are actually many paths up that mountain, as far as I
Hmm.
know. Um, you know, meditation should have to do with, well, should, there are no shoulds. I mean, some people say a word, your personal magic word, or you can just say Om, which is kind of the word that you're first taught. And, you should regulate and monitor your breathing and pay attention to it, and whatever works to clear the monkey mind. I mean,
Hmm.
uh, our friend Charles Knight in Assassin does a lot of meditating when he's in prison. So read that book and that whole section about Charles being in prison. I think you'll enjoy it. I'm
Yeah, I
speaking to
think
the reader that wrote the
Chris,
question.
well, I enjoyed it also, but I have read it. So let's see. Someone asks, says that they gather from our conversations that you are, pessimistic for humanity in the short run, but optimistic in the long run. And so, what the question is, so roughly, what time frame does your pessimism turn to optimism? Like,
Mhm.
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, actually. Um, I don't think we're going to solve the problem of, well, like Einstein said, after hydrogen, the most common thing in the universe is stupidity. Uh, Actually, to be more accurate, I would say it's psychological aberration.
Hmm.
And so until everybody can cure their personal psychological aberrations, and we all have them, the world is going to remain a crazy place.
Hmm.
So, and the problem with that is that technology, I'm going to tie this in a moment, technology has been increasing at Moore's law, and I think it's increasing it faster than Moore's law in some areas at this point. It's a hyperbolic curve. Um, the problem is that technology is increasing really fast, but the moral state of humans is probably not increasing at all, or maybe it's going downhill. I mean,
Hmm.
that's arguable. So when you arm chimpanzees or naked apes with nuclear weapons and stuff beyond nuclear weapons, you're asking for trouble. So yeah, I'm pretty gloomy looking at that, I think, factual presentation of the way the world works. On the other hand, I think Kurzweil is right about the singularity. And maybe if the singularity does all the things that it could do, and you should read Kurzweil's book, then maybe that'll ameliorate the problem. I
Hmm.
don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and find out. But since he says he thinks, and he's in the best position to know, we're only 20 or 25 years away from it.
Hmm.
I guess we'll find out.
Hmm. Well, it's certainly from things you said before, it seems like the difficulties that we have to the like kind of the known knowns, the known challenges that we have to work through now seem to last for a decade at least, right? I mean, it's going to take us a decade to work through. I mean, the economic conditions that we have, at least you would think, regardless of if we escalate to a full-blown war with someone or anything else. I mean, it's going to take at least a decade, don't you think?
Seems that way to me. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, especially since the powers that be everywhere in the world are not just doing the wrong things, but they're doing the exact opposite of the right things.
Hmm.
So I think the experience that we have with the Soviet Union and Mao's China indicate that things can last a long time, at
Hmm.
least a decade.
Hmm. Okay, last question I have for you today was about India. Do you have any perspective on any point of view or opinion on India's prospects for the future, economic or otherwise?
Well, I've been to 155 countries, but unfortunately, the subcontinent is not one of them.
Hmm.
So I can't speak from a hands-on point of view, but I've certainly read a lot and viewed a lot on India, and I know lots of Indians. Uh, So based on that, I'll give you an opinion. And I think it's actually pretty hopeless. India should have done better than China, but there are lots of reasons why it didn't, and I don't think it will in the future. Uh, the fact is, India's major export is smart people.
Mm,
Smart people who are born in India get the hell out and come to the US or Canada or someplace. So we have Indians that are a standard deviation or 2 or 3 above what's left in the subcontinent.
mm,
As far as that place is concerned, based on what I know, it really is kind of hopeless. It's not going to change. And
interesting.
we could talk about reasons why it's going actually in many ways downhill, where China is actually going up. I mean,
Mm,
the fact that a lot of Indians are, well, first of all, they're, in the parts of the country and Bangladesh, there are serious Mohammedans. It's not good. Or in India itself, there's serious Hindus. That's highly irrational. Um, no, I'm not terribly optimistic.
well,
Upward
the
too.
exporting of your greatest national asset, though, I mean, that's really that's a compelling reason in and of itself. I mean, it really
I
is,
think that's
Misha.
a pretty big reason. Yeah,
Hmm, hmm.
yeah.
Okay.
They don't. I mean, unfortunately, the British were not able to make very much of Western civilization stick there, and insofar as they've done well at all, it's because of the British conquest. And I don't believe in conquest, but looking at the facts, they did the Indians a favor.
Hmm. That's a controversial statement, but I'm
Yeah.
certainly very true. So, okay, good. Actually, I have one last question for you. We haven't talked about this at all, but I wonder if you've heard all the news about this so-called unprecedented hack of government computer systems that is already, they're managing to pin on Russia already. I don't know if you've heard much about that, or if what your just thoughts are on that whole idea, what you think is going on.
Yeah, I've heard about that. And apparently, uh, the Israelis had a lot of their systems hacked, but who knows what the facts are? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, all we know is what we hear in the media, and the media is just a parrot for what they're told by the government. So it's interesting to know this, or think you know it, or think other people know it, or
Yeah.
but have you seen any practical consequences of this as yet?
I haven't, but this is the interesting thing. The computer hack, the way that they describe it, and they've come out, universally, like this is unprecedented, it's so terrible, and they've all, of course, they know that somehow that it was Russia already, but it has the same feel of all of our abstract problems that have been pushed on us lately. I mean, like COVID, it's everywhere. It's a danger
Hmm.
to everybody and everything. We can't show it to you, so that we can fight it directly. Instead, it's just this abstract thing. Earlier in the summer, racism was in Denver. In fact, racism was declared a health emergency. Okay,
Right.
yeah, a health emergency. Now,
That's crazy.
racism, COVID, and this computer hack have the same feel of me. That it's everywhere and nowhere. It affects everything, and we have to be very afraid of it, and no one knows what to do about it.
I think the battle plan for our leadership, such as it is uh, when in fear, when in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout. I mean, you don't get the best and brightest people that go into government. And what's going on today is increasing proof of this and cause to worry about the future.
Certainly is. All right. Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Doug. I appreciate it. We will talk to you tomorrow morning.
Okay, not that worrying does any good, but yeah, talk to you then, Matt.
All right.